Hi, everyone. My name is Dominguez, and tonight I'm presenting my culminating project titled Argument and Recommendations for Stronger Collaboration in California's Early Care and Education System. So first, I want to start with some background. What is early care and education, and why should government intervene? So early care and education, or ECE programs, serve children ages 0 through 5 with care and education. It might be also called preschool or childcare, also often called pre-K or pre-kindergarten programs because they serve children before entering kindergarten. So ECE programs produce benefits to both parents and families, children, future generations, and society. Can anyone name one of these benefits? Maria? Yes, that's great. Yeah. It's a great way to socialize your kids at a young age. There's many benefits, including more women in the workforce because mothers do not have to stay home to take care of their kids. So why should government intervene? Why is this a public policy issue? ECE programs are both unaffordable and inaccessible. Families pay between 7 and 67% of their income toward ECE programs. That big variance is due to different family structures. Some families have 2 working parents, some have only 1, some have more kids or less kids. In addition, 60% of Californians live in a childcare desert where the number of children outnumbers the number of childcare spaces. So this is a problem that the state government wants to tackle, and therefore they administer ECE programs. We also know from literature that it is government's responsibility to ensure efficient and effective program administration. And from Munger's Triangle, disagreement between politics and experts requires institutional reform. So that's how we get to the need for greater collaboration. So how did we get to this point? California uses a mixed delivery system for ECE programs, which means that there's a mixture of program types, provider types, and funding sources. So that means that families have options for where they can send their child, either to a school site or a center, which is like a business you might see like in a strip mall, or even home-based care. On top of this confusion, there's also 2 different state departments that administer ECE programs: the California Department of Education, CDE, and the California Department of Social Services, CDSS. Plus, some but not all programs have access to guaranteed education funding through Proposition 98. So there's a lot of complexity, and that's a key reason why we need collaboration. So here we can see funding over time for the ECE system, where we're starting in 2007, 2008, and going all the way to 2018-19. And funding overall for childcare and preschool programs dropped following the Great Recession. And this funding, adjusted for inflation, was finally regained in 2018-19 to pre-recession levels. However, if you notice, the blue bar is shorter at the end of the graph versus the beginning, meaning that there was less funding for childcare spaces or slots, childcare and preschool, which means that fewer children were served. So there's we're making gains, but not as much as we had been. In addition, the makeup of the spaces has changed over time. In 2008, it was about even between the general child care program and California State Preschool Program. They both serve low-income children, but preschool serves specifically 3- and 4-year-olds, whereas general child care serves children 0 through 12 years old. So in 2009, when there was some restructuring of funds, we started significantly investing just in 3- and 4-year-olds. So this has caused some tension between school-based programs and community-based programs. And this tension also calls for the need for collaboration. So in my paper, I described and analyzed 3 different missed opportunities for collaboration. And tonight I'm just going to focus on one for the sake of time, which is the transition of childcare programs. So here's a quick little timeline. Hopefully I can get through it. But basically, the first three are showing that there were three different proposals to restructure the governance of early care and education administration in California. So the first one was to take the division at CDE and make it a branch, which would mean it would have more power and resources within the department. Then the second one, the governor decided he wanted to create a new state department, a standalone department of early childhood development. But then just a few months later, for his May revision, he proposed to instead transition the administration from Department of Education to Department of Social Services. So that would just mean moving who controlled the funds and programs from one department to the other. So if we loop around, just 2 weeks later, the Department of Finance presented this new proposal to a state advisory board, and they voiced their concerns. However, this did end up passing through the state budget. And then there is just a continued history of people relaying their concerns. Advocates tried to run a separate bill to get their input involved in the transition, but this bill didn't go anywhere. The Legislative Analyst Office recommended stopping or pausing the transition. At the time, it actually was projected to cost more than the original January proposal to create a new department. So the LAO said this makes no sense. Surprisingly, the superintendent, the head of the CDE, did not have any opinions anywhere to be found about the transition. But the transition went through anyway, and it officially took place on July 1st, 2021. So we're about 1.5 years out from that. And in the aftermath, there has been some tension between the two departments. And I wrote about that in my paper. So some highlighted recommendations. I wrote 11 different recommendations in my paper, but here's just 3 relating to the transition. So the first one is to focus governance efforts on alignment and efficiency. Alignment meaning coherence between departments, specifically Department of Education and Department of Social Services, to break down silos and align certain niche things like provider reimbursement rates and age categories for children and programs. And efficiency meaning strategically allocating funds to maximize the return on investment. The second recommendation is to develop community relationships with policymakers. This was found in someone else's thesis, actually, in 2020. Thought this is a great way to make legislators know the value and importance of ECE programs and make them prioritize that in their legislation and budget making. And with about 1/4 of the legislature being new in this upcoming cycle, it's a great time to start developing those relationships now. And then the last one, to fund collaborative efforts. Literature says that resources are very important to have for collaboration. So things like meeting space and facilitators are essential. So if government or philanthropy can contribute funds or resources to collaborative efforts, then we can see a lot more action take place. So some final thoughts. Several initiatives are still unfolding real time for the ECE space, including the transition that I talked about, as well as the new collective bargaining agreement with the state of California and family childcare providers. And there's also increased need to work collaboratively as the administration faces a state budget deficit. So we need stronger collaboration in early care and education in California. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So in your research on CDE versus CDSS, what did you see as the pros and cons of whether it be a new department or one of these existing departments?
Yes, that's a great question. One of the papers I cited, analyzed different governance for early career and education across various states. And there tends to be 3 different ways that states organize their governance, either some type of coordination between their education and social services agency. I forgot the second one. And or creating a completely new department. And so personally, I think creating a new department would have been best, which was Governor Newsom's January proposal. I think in the aftermath of the transition, which is what was enacted, it almost seems like CDSS like won in a fight of tug of war. And there's like behind the scenes drama with certain people getting positions and certain people not getting positions, or in the transition, CDE had to lose some staff with the programs to go to Department of Social Services. So they lost their own capacity at CDE, and there's still need for the Department of Social Services to rely on education for legacy IT systems. So perhaps if we had more time to consider this, and keep in mind, this was during early pandemic, so they probably were trying to rush a solution. If we had more time, maybe we could have created a new department like Newsom originally thought. And that's personally what I would suggest, even though they just spent all this money. Maybe they should go back and make a new department. Yeah. Justin, did you have a question?
Yeah. My question is.
Yeah.
Of the 11, I wanted to know why 3 feel impactful and why.
Yes, so I chose these 3 recommendations because I felt they most closely aligned with the example I presented on. Some of the other recommendations I included were to define the scope of collective bargaining. Right now, only family childcare providers can negotiate with the CalHR, and not other parts of the field, but parts of collective bargaining affect the entire workforce. So that has been frustrating for the workforce and for advocates to try to pass initiatives through legislation or the state budget, but they're shut down because, oh, that's a collective bargaining issue. So I recommended the state should make it more clear that certain issues are just not up for legislation. But that didn't have to do with the transition example. Another recommendation was just to seek more funding in general to stabilize the early care and education system. And I recognize that maybe California can't do that on its own, but they can allocate resources to lobby the federal government, which has been pretty supportive of early care and education. So that would be a great way to secure more funding for the field and hopefully reduce some competition between the more school side and the community side. Well, thank you, everyone.